mic, yes.
Okay.
Do you support the Green New Deal?
Pardon?
The Green New Deal?
Yes, but it's funny you said the Green New Deal. I support a Green New Deal. So I think sometimes the idea of a Green New Deal, absolutely I support. The idea that we have this huge system, this huge, like the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, where we create jobs, all green, all sustainable, absolutely I do. Yes. Yes.
Marianne, can we wage peace if we don't act on climate change?
No, we can't. We can't even have a planet if we don't act on climate change. You know, it's kind of like for somebody recovering with drugs and alcohol, your sobriety has to come first. If you don't take care of that, nothing else is going to happen. But you know, I have to tell you something. Some of these kinds of things are, you get any good Democrat, and if any good Democrat wins, we'll get those things. And that's why I always supported any Democrat, whether it's me or anyone else. So some things, you just got to make sure a Democrat wins, we'll get that. A good progressive Democrat wins, we'll get that. Good progressive Democrat wins, we'll get that. I feel that my conversation actually is such that we need to expand beyond that as well. Because even in both of those issues, what you're talking about is the dysfunction of the human mind, that we have treated the earth the way we have treated it. Now, for the women in the room, I'm going to share a little something about, I mentioned someone actually telling me she was a pagan culture earlier in the evening. The beginning of the environmental crisis was the destruction of the old pagan culture by an early dispensation of the Christian church. Because before that time, the women of Europe, many called the witches, which meant at that time the wise women, worked within the villages and the rural areas of Europe at that time, and they held aloft rituals and ceremonies that kept people in a sense of divine partnership with the earth, with the sky, with the waters, and so forth. The early dispensation of Christianity, I'm not saying that's Christianity today, introduced a very different paradigm, which is one of the reasons I wanted to destroy that culture, in which it was no longer deemed that mankind was in partnership with nature, but rather that God had given man power over nature. And then even they left out the be a good steward part. And so in that divine connection, it's all about lack of reverence. That's where the moral and spiritual dysfunction is, a lack of reverence. When I think of things like fracking, it shows such a lack of reverence for the earth. And so we have to address more than climate change. We have to address this moral and spiritual dysfunction within ourselves that has led us to not realize the insanity of destroying your habitat. And so we need to do more. And by the way, this is another example. Let's say, right now, obviously, our EPA functions as a mockery of its original intent. It does not function as an agency that protects the environment. It functions as an agency to protect short-term profit maximization for oil companies and chemical companies. That's why the current chief of the EPA was a chemical company guy, the one before that was an oil company guy. But if all we do is win this election, so we bring in a world-class environmentalist, if all we do is do that, and they come back in 22, or they win again in 24, then it will all end. We have to take something in at some deeper level. At some deeper level of realization. We're acting insanely here. And when we talk about the maladaptive behavior of the human race, that's what makes our collective behavior maladaptive for our survival. We're destroying our own habitat and the way we treat each other. So yes, absolutely, we must quote-unquote fight climate change, but it needs to go into deeper levels than that, within our hearts, within our souls, within the way we talk to our children, within the way we act as activists locally, etc. Does that make sense?
I agree with a lot of the things that you're saying. I don't know much about you. What about your history and your career that qualifies you for this job?
What qualifies me for this job? I've had a 35-year career working with people, up close and personal, people's pain, people working to transform their lives. And everything I'm talking about to you tonight is taking everything I've been doing for 35 years and applying the same principles of transformation to the transformation of a society. I keep seeing on the internet when people say to me, what makes you qualified? Why did you enter an entry-level position? I said, you're right, the presidency isn't an entry-level position. Nobody who hasn't had a 35-year career dealing with the internal dynamics that lead to pathological behavior that destroys your life should even think about running for the presidency. Needs to be in the 21st century. Franklin Roosevelt said that the administrative aspects of the presidency are secondary, that it is primarily a role of moral leadership. Now, I have a lot of respect for there are a lot of very good politicians and a lot of fine political experts for whom I have tremendous respect, and that includes the other people who are running and will be running. Please don't get me wrong. But the mindset, the political mindset of politics today is a relic of 20th century thinking. It has a very mechanistic view. It's all about just changing things on the outside. That mindset got us into this ditch. It is not the mindset that will get us out of it. Sometimes even the best politicians, I think of them like really good car mechanics. You might have a really good car mechanic and knows how to keep the car running, but that car mechanic doesn't know how to drive you to Milwaukee. That car mechanic doesn't necessarily know what road you should be on or what road got you here. Somebody said to me in an interview earlier today, well, Ms. Williamson, you've been very much about inspiration. But, that has nothing to do with politics. Politics just has to do with dollar cents. I said, politics has nothing to do with inspiration, huh? Then what was the Declaration of Independence? It has nothing to do with inspiration. Then what's Lincoln's second inaugural address? Has nothing to do with inspiration. Then what is the Gettysburg Address? What was the abolitionist movement? What was the suffragette movement? What was the civil rights movement? Politics today is the aberration. The fact that I'm talking inspiration in politics, I'm the great American tradition in that, not me personally, in that conversation. We need to reclaim politics for the great aspirational nature of the American character. What it has become is not what it should continue to be.
I have experienced that question in my mind about, well, honestly, if you look on paper with the government, if I would have given up, and I never would have given up my kids, but if I would have given up my kids, there would have been more support for them as foster children than there was for me as a single mom. And I guess to me, there's a lot of stones I can kick over. I can go into not just that, but even, you mentioned pharma, there's medical devices. As a single mom, I took medical advice. They laughed when they decided how it might be if that medical device didn't turn out. And it didn't for me and 46,000 other women. So I think there's so many obstacles that we have to somehow address, and I love what you're saying, but where do you begin?
Okay, well, you begin by electing different people. But this is the issue. We have been trained to expect so little. We have been trained to ask for so little. Every other advanced democracy has universal health care. We've been trained, we've been propagandized into it. It's all propaganda. It's what we've allowed to happen in our minds. If we had universal health care, so many Americans live, and this woman is an example, with chronic tension and anxiety. So you can't be at rest. So many people in America, what's going to happen if I get sick? What's going to happen if one of my kids gets sick? I have to stay in this job even though I hate it, but I need to be there for the benefits. How am I going to pay for my kids to go to college? How am I going to pay off these college loans? It does not have to be this way. It does not have to be this way. We are the richest nation in the world. An individual and the nation expresses its morals by how it spends its money. It's not like we don't have the money. Nobody ever asks how we're going to pay for it. If they want a $2 trillion tax cut, where 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very, very richest individuals and corporations. Nobody asks who's going to pay for it. If they want to go into a $2 trillion war, they just, turns out to be the biggest blunder in American history. Every dollar you put into people, into education, into making life one in which it is easier for people to soar. You can't, how can you live your life? How can you be your best when you're so chronically upset all the time and anxious all the time? And Big Pharma has an answer for that. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, let us awaken.
student at DMAC, Iowa Student Action. I just want to preface this question by thanking you, Ms. Williamson, for fighting for free college for all for students.
No, I'm having, I have over hearing aids, and I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you put the mic a little bit, I need to see your mouth.
Okay, yeah, like this?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for fighting for free college for all for our students. If I'm being honest, I don't have the money for student housing to go along with EMAC, so I drive almost an hour in the morning to get to school every day. So I want to know if you would support, along with free college for all, free student housing for people like me, because I know a couple of them. And then along with that, I want to know if that free college for all also extends to undocumented students and students who are formerly or currently incarcerated.
Certainly formerly incarcerated. I mean, you were a citizen of the United States. You know, it used to be accepted in this country that when you were no longer incarcerated, you could pay your debt to society. So, and you see this with felons who are not allowed to vote, etc. So that's a really important principle. And I was reading just the other day about how the Department of Homeland Security had set up this fake university in Detroit, not or outside Detroit, somewhere in Michigan, in order to lure undocumented students who were looking for student visas. This is so unethical. This is so wrong. But it's all part of it, and on the issue of student housing, I don't know, that's a detail specific I can't respond to. But it is the consciousness, you know, the issue of the president doesn't have a magic wand, nor should the president have a magic wand. But on so many of these issues, it is the consciousness of the president, both in the people that are appointed to head these various agencies, but also the decision-making process of the president in all these issues. So underneath the issues aren't always the issue. There's an underlying moral issue. And what you were speaking to, the underlying moral issue is, why would we not be helping you succeed? On what level do we not get that your success is a greater consumer base, greater vibrancy, and the point of the United States of America, that you become all that you can be? That's where America is off. So I don't want to go to Washington just to fight so that you can have a certain right. I want to be in Washington in order to help awaken the American mind to once again return to the notion that a government of the people, by the people, for the people means you. That's why should it be so hard? Why should it be so hard? You know, every once in a while, you see these stories. Some kid who grew up in deep poverty somewhere, grew up in a car, and now that child has escaped, and that child is now going to an Ivy League school. And we see these stories, and we go, oh, that's so wonderful. But then you ask yourself, why do so many millions of American children have to escape? I was reading last night about how some Good Samaritan, you've probably heard it, it's been all over the news in the last day or two, that with this cold wave, this Arctic vortex, that some Good Samaritan in one of these cities bought 70 hotel rooms for the homeless. Who are we as a people that local governments are doing everything necessary in partnership with churches and corporations to make sure that no one would be outside in this cold? You know, I heard a story that a Protestant theologian told. And it had to do with the Good Samaritan. And the story to me displays the transition from a Good Samaritan to a conscious Samaritan. This is the way it goes. So the Good Samaritan, we all know the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is walking down the road, sees a beggar, and gives the beggar alms. And then the Good Samaritan continues down the road. And the Good Samaritan sees another beggar and gives the beggar alms. And then the Good Samaritan continues down the road and sees another beggar and gives the beggar alms. At some point, a light bulb goes off inside the head of the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan asks, why are there so many beggars? That's what we want to ask. In the United States of America, in the richest nation in the world, why is it so hard for so many people? Why? Because of the huge 40-year-long theft from the public treasury of major material resources of this country into the hands of the proverbial 1%. That's why. Thanks to Oprah Winfrey, I assume many of you who bought my books. club in America. I cannot complain. The free market of America, righteous commerce has been good to me. If you're quote unquote in the club in America, it's the most fabulous thing. Not enough people can make it into the club today. That is what is so unsustainable. The American dream isn't just that you can make it or I can make it. The American dream is that anyone can make it. And when I say make it, we're not talking about giving handouts. You know, Martin Luther King, one of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes, he said, if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. If they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. So it's a change in our thinking, isn't it? And it's not just saying, when we send somebody to Washington who, you know, you say, well, it'll fight for you. Well, if that person doesn't have Democratic Congress, you know, it doesn't work that way. We need to awaken. No, this has to be, and that's one of the things that I think, to be honest, Democrats and people on the left do too much. You know, we like to show off hot, sexy presidential campaigns, maybe the midterms, and then you kind of go back to your life and hope they'll handle them. People on the right tend to be more sophisticated and mature than that. They know that making sure they get what they need is something they're in there day in and day out. And so the changes that we have to make within ourselves in order to put this country back on track is a change that can't stop after this next election. It has to be a permanent shift inside ourselves. All of us need to see our citizenship, not only its rights, but its responsibilities, as simply a dimension of what it means to be a conscious, mature, and responsible person. And a happier person, because you're playing the big game. We have a crisis of adulthood in our society. Too many men have been acting like boys. Too many women have been acting like girls. Grown-ups sometimes have to look at some sobering realities. That's what it means to be a grown-up. Yes, sir.
Question about supporting among people who know or push the campaign. I think
Yes.
sometimes it's easier to go knock on doors and put signs up and put things on social media than it is just to talk to your friends and family where you know they're on the opposite end of the ideological spectrum from you. So what's your advice when we're really excited to support you over the course of the next year?
Mahatma Gandhi said that the leader of the Indian independence movement was the small, still voice within. I want to empower you, not disempower you. That means I'm not going to give you a script. Say what you feel moved to say. It might be something on your Facebook page, or your Twitter, or your Instagram, or your Snapchat. It might be as simple as, you might want to go here, or you should go here, or you want to go with me to here, or why don't you check her website? She's got issues on there up the gazoo. You know, candidacy like mine is outside the box. And so it takes some time. You know, it takes some time, some exposure, like how would this really work? How does this really happen? And so I absolutely would need your help. And as I said, I understand there's so many candidates and good candidates who are going to be coming through Iowa in the next year. So I'm just grateful for anything you do to say to someone, I think you should hear her. I think you want to hear her. Or I'm going to go hear her again. That's how it happens. Political power is not about, you know, all the external ways of strategizing. A win for this candidacy will not come from traditional political strategizing. It will come from the quantum field of tapping into what I believe are the deepest yearnings and aspirations of the American people. What I'm doing is really very traditional. What's happening is the aberration. That makes sense? So I believe that the social axis of change in America does not occur along the horizontal axis, it occurs along the vertical axis. What do I mean by that? Traditional politics says, let's figure out what to say to what group, let's figure out what to say to them, let's figure out what to say to them. It's so shallow, it's so tawdry. The vertical axis means you simply seek to speak the deepest truth as you understand it. I want to speak from the American in me to the American in you. I think there are times most of us have experienced this in our families. Okay, we're going to have a family meeting. That's what a political campaign is. We need to have a family meeting. I'm not speaking at the deepest level to the white in you, the black in you, the brown in you, the gay in you, the straight in you, the woman in you, the man in you, the religious in you, the not religious in you. I'm speaking to the American. We eat pour of a spoon out of many one. Our diversity is our richness. It's extraordinary. The whole idea is you can be anybody you want to be. That's the point. is formed by our fealty to common principles of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The idea that all men are created equal. The idea that governments are instituted to secure our rights, not to disempower us. And I believe there is great power in truth-telling. You know, I have learned in my career over 35 years, and this gentleman who asked me what makes you qualified. We heal in life one aha at a time. Like you read something, you hear something, you go through something, and you go, oh wow, I hadn't seen it that way. And your life changes, you have enough of those moments of clarity. We need that as Americans.
It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
As a veteran, on behalf of all veterans, my brothers and sisters that are still in, my question would be, overcoming hate with love, how would that be a military strategy, or how would you use that as a military strategy, and what changes would you make? You know, and against, you know, foreign enemies, how would that, leading with love, how would we be able to not be looked at as a nation of just, oh, we're just lovers and whatnot against foreign enemies, and also what military changes would you make?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge, on behalf of, I'm sure, everyone here, thank you for what you've done. As I said before, I have great respect for the military, and any critique I have is not of the military itself. It is for the civilian leadership, which of course we don't want to mess with there being civilian leadership, that's very important. But too often, military power has been wielded with a lack of emotional sobriety. That's number one. Number two, because we have not waged peace, because we have not put enough attention on peace building, too much of the burden has been put on the military in order to clean up messes that should never even have existed. I'm not a pacifist when I think of what's happening in Afghanistan right now, for instance. And this is an example of how shallow our politics is. Everybody's talking about these peace talks with the Taliban removing the 15,000 troops from Afghanistan. For most Americans, this is kind of like, oh good, we're gonna bring them home, let's bring them home. I mean, has anybody in this room given more than 5 minutes of thought, because maybe you saw an article in the paper or on the news of the fact that we might be soon bringing troops home from Afghanistan? Has anybody given that more than 5 minutes of thought? That's what's wrong with America. Do you know what's going to happen to the women of Afghanistan when the Taliban takes over? Because if you really think about that, and this is an example of how the use of having our military there. Now, I appreciate that it's the choices between something bad and something bad. Don't get me wrong. But it's the lack of consciousness. That fact that our president will not be I would be heartbroken. I'm not saying I wouldn't bring the troops back, but I can tell you this, that the consciousness that would prevail within my decision making would be such that I couldn't for a minute not think deeply about the fact of what it will mean for the women of Afghanistan if the Taliban take over. So it is a lack of sobriety. You know, one of the things, I'm a little bit of a World War II buff. When you look at Churchill, and you look at Franklin Roosevelt, and you look at the deep emotional sobriety, the attitude with which they waged World War II simply because it needed to be done. That's a use of military power that I think Americans can support. But since World War II, so much of the application of military power has been used, Vietnam War, the Iraq invasion, etc. And even when you look at the invasion of Iraq, where were we? Where were we? Not just where was George Bush, not just where was Dick Cheney, where were we? They were going to invade a country that had done nothing to us, had nothing to do with 9/11. And even if they have weapons of mass destruction, grow up! We do business with countries that have day. It has to do with us also. And then look how the U.S. military, and nobody, we have enough evidence. The military commanders, well, why are we doing this? This wasn't the military's fault. Because you hear about generals after general after general who would come in and say, why are we doing this? Do you know why we're doing this? I don't know. Does that make sense? So I believe that if more people in the world had seen the American decal on schools, on roads, on genuinely democratic, on hospitals, on genuinely democratic institutions for years before 9/11, that groups such as Al-Qaeda might not have had the power that they ultimately had. The problem is not internationally. The problem is not just people who hate us. The problem has been people who just don't like us anymore either. When I grew up, and I would hear politicians go, what we're doing internationally is to protect America's vital interests. I was so naive. I thought that meant democracy. Didn't you? Isn't that what you thought it meant? No. It means the oil companies and anybody else and what we're doing over there. Look at what's happening with Saudi Arabia. For a $100 billion arms deal. Our military support of Saudi Arabia is contributing to the deaths by starvation of tens of thousands of people in Yemen. So that we can, and Pompeo says, well, you can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. No, you can't. If I know you're going to commit a murder, I know you are, and I sell you that gun, I am complicit. But it's kind of like with the children at the border. When someone in the Trump administration talking about the separation policy of parents and children, you know what that person said? Oh, we just didn't think people would even notice. We didn't think people would care. Well, we did care, and that's good, but we should also care about Yemen. We should also care about what happens with the Taliban. You can't be a citizen of the most powerful country in the world and live a full, meaningful existence without thinking about these things, without bearing witness to the agony of others. And if we do not, then we just put all the burden on the military. So my point is that we must wage peace. Just like sickness is the absence of health, health isn't the absence of sickness, war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. If we did more to wage peace, there would not be so many deaths, military deaths, and by our veterans. We do wrong by our military. And that's, I believe, what we need to recognize. And this has less to do with providing national security and more to do with an agenda that is driven far too much by military contractors. We now have what amounts not to a covert takeover, corporate takeover of the U.S. government. This is a very overt corporate takeover of the U.S. government. The first selected Secretary of State in this administration has been the CEO of Exxon. Exxon, not a great humanitarian, not a great diplomat. Exxon, the heads of your EPA, set of world-class environmentalists. The present guy is an chemical company exec. The one before that, oil company exec. And the gentleman who is now the acting head of the Defense Department was a 30-year executive at Boeing. I believe that does not show respect for you. It does not show respect for the veterans. It does not show respect for our men and women who have volunteered and are willing to, if necessary, risk their lives for the people of the United States. We owe you more. So I would be far more sober, far more emotionally sober about the application of brute force. I think that we should be, like Teddy Roosevelt said, we should talk softly and carry a big stick. And what we have become since World War II is we talk in very bellicose ways, and more our stick appears weak. So I would wish to see a far more powerful partnership between the Defense Department and the State Department. Right now, the State Department is resourced and financed in tiny ways compared to the money we spend on the Defense Department. We spend something like $1 to $1,000 compared to $1,000 $1,000 on war preparedness, $1 on peace waging. I would like to see us far more proactively wage peace through the kind of humanitarian issues I discussed, educational opportunities, economic opportunities, etc., so that you could do the work that you do as a military, as a member of the U.S. military, but not be played like a football by irresponsible, immature little boys.
Thank you for being here. I'm a third grade teacher, and I would love to hear your ideas on how to improve education and how to do right by the 8-year-olds that you're talking about that we really need to feed into.
A lot of it is money, but not all of it is money. There are many, did you see Michael Moore's film, Where to Invade Next? You know, that's got a bad title because you think it's about military things. Did anybody see that movie? Where it's a great movie, isn't it? When you see so many of the more enlightened educational systems throughout the world, it would be fascinating for you to see. I think the main thing is that if we change our consciousness in this country, that every child 8 years old and younger, it's not only that they should have a world-class education, they should have world-class food, they should have world-class culture. You know that 11 states in the United States do not even require half a year of American history and civics education. If a child does not learn about the civil rights when young, the Bill of Rights when young, how do you know to be horrified when it's under assault when you're an adult? Culture, taking arts and culture out of our schools when we know that this improves cognitive functioning. So for me, it would not be just about education. We need more than we need preschool and we need education after. We need an entirely different view of where the resources of this country belong. And so they belong to doing everything possible to make sure that our children get what they need in order to become fully self-actualized human beings. Does that include also class size? Yes. Does it include also better pay for teachers? Yes, of course it does. But it includes more than that. It includes a far more enlightened approach to the realization that doing what is necessary to make sure that the American child is given a world-class everything is the way we prepare for our future. And I'll tell you something, my economic councils would have fewer economists and more elementary schools.